Paranormal Fascism. Sounds kind of like a B-movie title, doesn't it? But what we're about to get into is a really strange and really dark chapter of history. We're going to explore this wild intersection where fascism, the occult, and yeah, even mainstream media all smashed together in Spain. And trust me, the fallout from that collision, it's still being felt today.
So this all kind of boils down to one big question. How can something like a conspiracy theory actually poison an entire nation? Because that's what we're going to see. Ideas that you think are just fringe, totally out there, can actually seep into the very fabric of a culture. And the consequences, they could be incredibly real and incredibly dangerous.
And don't think for a second this is just some dusty old history. I mean, get a load of this. We're talking 2004. The Madrid train bombings, a horrific, traumatic event for Spain. And in the aftermath, what did some right-wing media outlets push? A completely baseless conspiracy. They weren't blaming a terrorist group. No, they were blaming a vast Judeo-Masonic conspiracy. I mean, seriously, where on earth does an idea like that even come from in the 21st century?
Yeah, that wasn't just a one-off thing. It wasn't random. It was actually the peak of a long, dark, and kind of twisted history. So to really get what's going on, we have to go back. I mean, way back.
So for centuries, Europe's whole relationship with the supernatural was pretty much shaped by the church, right? Which, often suppressed science to maintain its authority. But then, the 19th century just hits like a tidal wave. You've got thinkers like Darwin challenging humanity's place in creation, while philosophers like Nietzsche famously declare that God is dead. And all of this creates this profound spiritual vacuum. People were desperate for meaning, but they didn't turn back to the old church. No, they rushed towards occultism, mysticism, and all these secret societies. So we've got the raw ingredients, right? A public that's fascinated by mysticism and a real loss of traditional faith. This is where this story turns. We're about to see how political opportunists took this widespread spiritual searching, injected it with the poison of racial hatred, and forged it into a deadly, mystic ideology. You see, the ideology that would eventually become Nazism, it wasn't born in a parliament or some public debate. It was incubated in the shadows, in these secret, esoteric circles. And right at the heart of it all was the Thule Society, part occult lodge, part nationalist hate group, and the direct organizational ancestor of the Nazi Party itself. And if you really want to understand the twisted logic at play here, just look at the society's founder, this guy Rudolf von Sebendorf. I mean, get this. He was a Freemason. He studied inclusive mystical traditions like Sufism and the Kabbalah. He was even, and this is the ironic part, initiated into Masonry by a Jewish family in Turkey. And yet, he would dedicate his life to building a virulent anti-Semitic ideology aimed at destroying them. It's just a chilling portrait of cognitive dissonance, really.
So, okay, these ideas are festering in secret societies, but how do they make that leap from the fringe right into the halls of power? Well, it takes a true believer. Someone with immense authority. And in Nazi Germany, that believer was one of the regime's most powerful and most feared men. His personal quest would turn these bizarre beliefs into official state policy.
That man was the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. And for him, this stuff was deeply personal. He was obsessed with a family story that an ancestor of his had been burned as a witch. Now, in his fanatical mind, the great witch hunts weren't about stamping out evil. Oh no. He thought they were a conspiracy by the church to exterminate a line of superior Aryan women who held actual supernatural powers.
And right there, that is the perfect illustration of how a personal paranormal belief becomes state policy. Himmler went and created a special division of the SS called the Ahnenerbe, and their official state-funded job? To scour the globe for archaeological artifacts and, esoteric proof that his twisted theories about Aryan superiority were actually true.
And the missions they undertook, all funded by the German state, seriously sound like something out of a fantasy novel. They built these massive archives to prove his witch theory. They sent agents on a real-life quest for the Holy Grail, a search that even took Himmler himself all the way to Spain. They even drew up plans to steal the mythical Golem of Prague from the Jewish community, hoping they could reanimate it as some kind of occult superweapon. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Okay, look, it's easy to dismiss all this as just bizarre, maybe even ridiculous, but this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Because this belief in a secret supernatural war, it wasn't just about dusty artifacts and old myths. It led directly and very intentionally to real-world persecution and mass murder. 200,000. That's the estimated number of Freemasons murdered by the Nazis across occupied Europe. And let's be clear, this wasn't some side effect of the war. This was a specific, targeted campaign.
And this is what's so vital to understand. The Nazis weren't just eliminating political rivals. In their minds, they were fighting an enemy on a totally supernatural plane. They genuinely believed that groups like the Freemasons held the keys to some secret, world-changing power, and that power had to be captured or utterly destroyed.
And you can see this warped logic perfectly in how they treated stolen documents. When they raided Masonic libraries, they prized the texts, meticulously studying them for hidden knowledge. But when they came across priceless Jewish texts, the actual heritage of a people, they were given almost no importance and were simply destroyed. Think about that. They valued imaginary magic over actual human culture.
It would be comforting to think that this was all just some bizarre, one-off German phenomenon. But it wasn't. The same dark blueprint emerged in another rising fascist state. And to see just how infectious this ideology was, we have to look at the Spanish parallel.
So let's talk about Spain's fertile soil. Because it turns out the country was kind of primed for this stuff. The ground was prepared for superstition long before fascism even showed up on the scene. It created this perfect environment where supernatural beliefs could really take hold.
The roots of this go back centuries, and it starts in a place you might not expect. Think 1492. When Spain expelled its Jewish population, it created this massive, unexpected problem, a medical vacuum. Suddenly, a huge number of skilled doctors were gone. So who did people turn to? They turned to folk healers, the curanderos. And for hundreds of years, these healers became the norm, mixing real hands-on experience with a heavy dose of superstition. Now, you fast forward to the early 20th century. Spain is dealing with widespread illiteracy, it's heavily controlled by the church, and it's basically fallen way behind the rest of Europe scientifically. It was the perfect storm, really, for all sorts of unorthodox beliefs to just flourish.
And all of that whole backdrop, brings us right to the Franco era. This is where things get really dark. Because this is the moment when that deep-rooted culture of folk belief gets completely hijacked. It gets fused with a brutal, violent political ideology, and what comes out the other side is something truly toxic. Paranormal fascism.
Just look at this number. 3,000. That's the estimated number of Freemasons that were murdered by Franco's forces. 3,000. And to put that in perspective, that was literally half of all the Freemasons in the entire country at the time, wiped out.
And this wasn't just some random purge. No, this was fueled by a deep, paranoid obsession. The regime hunted down anyone they even suspected of having ties to the Masons. And you know who that ended up being? A whole lot of progressive, secular teachers, people who were basically seen as a threat to Franco's rigid, ultra-Catholic authoritarian vision for Spain.
Okay, so most of us have heard about the Nazis and their weird obsession with the occult, right? Well, what's not as well known is that Spanish fascists were running a very, very similar playbook. You see, where the Nazis mixed their racism with political mysticism, the Spanish Phalange mixed their super strict Catholicism with occult beliefs, even though the church itself said no way. And it gets weirder. Just like the Nazis had official government groups for paranormal research, the Phalange set up its own parallel organization to do the exact same thing.
This whole obsession, it went all the way to the very end. I mean, the circumstances around Franco's actual death are just bizarre. He's been sick for a long time, and the regime basically decides when he's going to die. They literally choose the date, November 20th. And why that date? Because it was the exact anniversary of the execution of the founder of their party, José Antonio Primo de Rivera. Then they bury both of them together in that monstrous monument, the Valley of the Fallen. It was like one last twisted act of political magic.
So Franco's gone. Democracy is back. You'd think all this weird fringe stuff would just kind of fade away, right? Nope, not at all. In fact, the opposite happened. It went mainstream. It got a slick new package for a massive new audience.
And a huge reason for that was this guy, Dr. Fernando Jiménez del Oso. Now, he was a psychiatrist, which was his secret weapon. He used that doctor title to give all this paranormal research a shiny veneer of scientific credibility. And man, did it work. He had these incredibly popular TV shows, radio shows, books. He basically single-handedly made this stuff normal for a whole generation.
And then there was Sánchez Dragó. He was a totally different beast, kind of this intellectual wildcard who went all the way from communism over to the far right. His whole vibe, this reputation as a serious thinker who was also fascinated by drugs, sex, and the occult, it gave these ideas a kind of intellectual cover, a seriousness that made it okay for smart people to be into it.
But here's where it gets really murky. There was a dark underbelly to all this mainstream popularity. That magazine that Dr. Jiménez del Oso edited,
Más allá de la ciencia, or Beyond Science? Well, it turns out it was publishing articles written by actual real-life Spanish neo-Nazis. They were just using fake names, hiding their fascist ideology right there in plain sight, tucked between stories about UFOs and ghosts.
Okay, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. And this is the really crucial part. Because none of this is just some weird, quirky history lesson. The media world that was built after Franco, it has a direct, lasting, and frankly, dangerous legacy that is very much alive today.
That whole tradition started by guys like Jimenez del Oso. It didn't just disappear, it's thriving. It lives on in some of Spain's most popular TV shows, like Cuarto Milenio, and radio shows like Espacio en Blanco. These aren't niche programs, they're huge hits, and they are the direct descendants of that whole movement.
And a connection, it's not even subtle, it's totally undeniable.
You can literally draw a straight line from the old fascist beliefs to what we see in the media today. The Franco-era idea that Freemasonry is some evil international conspiracy? Yep, you see that mirrored in modern books and media. The whole Judeo-Masonic plot, it gets dusted off and trotted out after national tragedies. It even affects how crimes are reported on, where maybe a cult's wacky alien ideology gets all the press, while the fact that the leader had deep connections to fascist elites just gets overlooked.
And remember, this isn't just a Spanish phenomenon. Not at all. In Argentina, there were accusations that the military junta performed occult rituals on Eva Perón's body. And guys like Miguel Serrano in Chile helped spread this brand of, esoteric fascism all over the world. It's a truly international ideology with really deep roots in the Hispanic world.
And this is the so what? This culture of treating conspiracy as just harmless entertainment? It has had absolutely dire consequences. It created a climate where insane theories about satanic cults could swirl around the horrific Alcácer murders. And it's what led us right back to the beginning of our story. It directly fueled that completely unhinged Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theory after the Madrid bombings in 2004. See? We've come completely full circle.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that what looks like harmless fun, curiosity about UFOs or ancient mysteries, can actually be a kind of Trojan horse. Making the paranormal mainstream created this modern acceptable package for some very old, very dangerous fascist conspiracy theories to survive and even find a whole new audience.
And that right there is the real challenge this whole history leaves us with. It's pretty easy to spot and dismiss a swastika, right? But it's a lot harder to recognize that same ideology when it's dressed up as just a fascinating mystery. So the question is, how do we learn to spot these dark ideas when they're hiding in plain sight? That's something to think about long after this explainer is over.